The Windfall Tax, a one-time tax targeted on companies who made unexpected profits in circumstances that they were not responsible for. In our case, it would be global demand rising after lockdowns started to ease and the Russian invasion of Ukraine leading to Russian oil being sanctioned. You could probably tell that I'm not a fan from the thumbnail, but apparently Maximillien Robespierre is. Who is this Robespierre? Is he the reincarnation of the French statesman who was driven mad and facilitated the reign of terror and taking away human rights and freedoms in the name of liberalism, becoming the very thing he strived to be against? No, it's actually a modern day YouTuber who uses the same name and profile. A little like me. Anyway, Robespierre is an interesting guy who put the Young Turks as one of his featured channels and responded to a common friend of my channel, Kyle Kulinski, who agrees with him on many things otherwise. But his intellect towers both TYT and Kulinski, which shows you can't judge people by association. So this is sort of a challenge for me. Now let's begin the video.
Why is there this resistance in the government to something which is sensible, popular, and could deliver about £120, £130 per family?
Yeah, well, it could, and there is a degree of resistance because it's always a bad principle to introduce retrospective taxes on people. When businesses plan, they know what the tax rate is going to be, and it does affect their planning. And if you come back later and take some tax out of them, it's a very unconservative thing to do.
Okay, well, first of all, it was done before, back in 1981, by Margaret Thatcher's Chancellor. It was a levy, it wasn't called a windfall tax, but it was a levy on banks to the value of £400 million. So you can't say it's an unconservative thing to do here.
Actually, you can. The 1981 bank levy was enacted because before, it was actually the government that controlled interest rates rather than the Independent Bank of England. They raised rates pretty high, which provided the banks what was effectively a subsidy. The levy was a counter to previous government intervention. You may also bring up the petroleum duty on oil companies, but again, these companies were granted monopoly rights by the government before privatization. The difference between then and now is the windfall tax was a response to high profits as a result of government action, but in the present day, it is in response to prices naturally recovering from COVID, supply chain crisis, and market forces. So the current windfall tax is not really conservative, but I think the only decent point is the 2011 supercharge, enacted by Conservative Chancellor of Exchequer George Osborne. But while it would be a Tory party thing to do, it is more of a mixed economy capitalist conservative act, rather than a laissez-faire approach from someone like Thatcher.
But the point here is that this is money this is excessive profits. This is massive profits we're talking about. This is not, okay, we're going to tax every company that has made a profit. These are excessive profits we're talking about. So if you say there's going to be a windfall tax on massive profits, then the companies already know that.
These are massive profits, yes, but they aren't excessive profits. Why? Because the oil industry is extremely volatile, especially with prices. The sector is known to have long-term price increases and decreases with significant economic booms and slumps. This leads to both periods of what you call excessive profits, as well as periods of massive losses. To deal with these massive losses, the oil companies save up during the boom years, which will be later used to finance the business during their lost years. As these profits actually matter, a tax on these profits can lower investment. For example, the US 1980 windfall tax was estimated to lower production by 3 to 6%. Of course, you may mention the high levels of £3.7 billion subsidies, which is fair, as well as the £9.9 billion in tax reliefs, which I don't count as a subsidy, but even then, I agree the UK system is too overly generous to oil companies. Now, officially these companies are taxed at a higher corporation rate at 30%. Rather than the average 19% along with a 10% supplement charge added. But major oil companies bypass this by spending money on decommissioning costs to cancel out any profit, add in the subsidies, and BP and Shell get more from the government than they paid in. We need to stop these subsidies towards decommissioning costs, as well as lower the corporation tax from 40% to normal levels, so these energy companies are not discouraged to invest in the UK. You could retort that this windfall tax would temporarily rectify this problem. But remember those periods of loss I mentioned? Well, a great example of a recent loss for these oil companies is BP facing a £4.2 billion loss in the UK due to the pandemic, while Shell faced a global loss of £14.7 billion. These losses for just two companies over 1 year dwarf the subsidies received by oil companies over a 4-year period. And now that Shell and BP have excessive profits, they can use these to compensate for their large losses back in 2020. Plus, BP plans to pay £1 billion in tax on its 2020 profits. Albeit it may be a cynical response to the windfall tax proposal, but it is logical considering how large their profits are and can't use the excuse of decommissioning costs.
It's not some sort of hidden thing. They have a feeling, okay, if we're making huge amounts of money during a cost of living crisis, it's likely we're going to have to pay a windfall tax. And, the energy companies have come out and said, it's not going to affect our investment.
First off, there have been many cost of living crises, but very few windfall taxes applied, often in a few select industries, and some of these windfall taxes weren't applied on the basis of cost of living, but because of the view that privatized companies were sold too cheaply, as in the case of Blair's 1997 windfall. It is hardly fair for oil companies to expect a windfall tax even when they make exorbitant profits while inflation skyrockets. But on the more important point, what energy companies said about their investment plans is mixed. BP said no investments would be paused if the tax was passed, but Shell is publicly concerned that the uncertainty of the tax threatens North Sea oil investments and the developments in low-carbon energies. Also, BP may not be that fussed, as I mentioned before, that the UK regulatory environment has been too generous with subsidies and tax loopholes, which I assume you want to remove like me. Removing these would make these energy companies think twice about the windfall tax and their investments.
Companies invest if they believe they can make a profit. These companies have made a profit. So saying we're going to tax part of that profit is not going to stop them from investing. They've already invested. And also, if they believe they can make a profit in the future, they're going to continue to invest. This windfall tax is neither here nor there when it comes to investment.
This is a weird argument. If you tax more, you lower their disposable profits, which limits the amount available for investment. Sure, you won't lower previous investment before the tax, but that isn't what we're talking about. We are referring to future investment that may decline. A tax may lower profitability, which discourages investment.
It's a natural reluctance, but it may be something the government decides to do, and if the companies are relaxed about it, they could just send in checks anyway.
This sounds like a sort of throwaway remark, but this is fundamental Tory ideology. They can send in checks if they want. This idea that taxation should be voluntary. We should, and these are the people who have been overseeing the rise in food banks. The food banks are doing the job of the government. If rich people want to help out, well, they can sign a check. They can write a check and send it into the exchequer, to the inland revenue, whatever. This is the whole fundamental core belief of the Conservative Party. Small government, let rich companies or rich individuals look after the poor. And here he just let the cat out of the bag here by saying, yeah, well, if these energy companies are making lots of money, well, they can write a check.
Sounds based. Maybe it's time to allow private charities who don't have to deal with the inefficiencies of tax collection or high labour costs to have more influence in helping the poor and avoiding the welfare dependency trap at the same time.
No, they need to be taxed. The government need to step in and say, you're making massive profits at the moment at the expense of the public. We're going to tax you over that.
I assume at the expense of the public means higher prices. Well, according to a taxpayers alliance group called Offshore Energy UK, they argue that consumers' annual heating bills will increase by £700 due to lower investment and declining oil stocks resulting from a windfall tax, which apparently outweighs the revenue raised. Of course, I am pretty sure this group is right-leaning and I haven't looked into this, but I think we really need to be vigilant about the possibility that a higher tax on energy companies will significantly increase prices. Besides, we need more investment to lower prices long-term. Conservative laws start to get annoyingly partisan, which I agree with Robespierre on, so I won't respond to that part. especially since I don't identify with the Tory party that much.
The reason many people are in this situation is because of Tory policies. Cutting welfare benefits, making it more difficult for ordinary people to survive.
People are in this situation mostly because of a pandemic damaging supply chains, a Russian invasion, and the recovery from these events. Many countries, if not all of the world, is facing an inflation crisis. Regardless, I haven't researched the effects of cutting welfare benefits since that is outside the scope of this video, so I'll leave that for another day. If you want to know more about the windfall tax, I did a video on it a few days ago, which you can check out. I plan on doing another windfall tax response to James O'Brien on Sunday. Sources are in the description. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give a like and comment, as it really helps my video in the YouTube algorithm. And if you like economics and political commentary, consider subscribing. Maybe follow me on my Twitter, and see you later.